The village of Enugu, located deep in the heart of Anambra State, Nigeria, was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Life moved at a slow and predictable pace, with most of the villagers depending on farming and petty trading to make ends meet. The houses in Enugu ranged from mud huts to old modern houses like Sarah's family home, crumbling yet proud, with its rusted zinc and cracked walls that told stories of better days long gone. Sarah had lived in that house her entire life. It stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by bushes and the faint smell of smoke from nearby kitchens. The house had seen better days, but it was still home to her. Her mother, Martha, and her younger siblings. Sarah was the eldest, and since her father's death 5 years ago, she had taken on many of the responsibilities of caring for her family. It wasn't easy, and most days she felt trapped in a life that seemed to have no future. At 23, Sarah had never left Enugu for anything other than visiting nearby villages. She had spent her entire life working the fields with her mother, selling foodstuffs in the village market, and dreaming of a better life in the city. Sometimes, as she sat in the shade of the mango tree behind their house, she would imagine what it must be like to live in Lagos or Abuja. She pictured herself in fine clothes, living in a nice apartment, working in an office or a big house as a maid for a wealthy family. Anything had to be better than the slow, suffocating life she had known in the village. Sarah often spoke of these dreams to her best friend Ola, who had left Enugu 2 years ago to work in Lagos. Ola had always been the adventurous one, the girl who wasn't afraid to leave the village and seek a better life. Sarah admired her courage, but had never found the strength to follow in her footsteps. Until one morning when everything changed. It was a hot afternoon, and Sarah was sitting under the mango tree, wiping sweat from her forehead after hours of working on the farm. Her hands were rough from the hard labor, her body sore from bending over in the sun. She was tired, physically and mentally, and as she rested, she couldn't stop her mind from wandering to the life she wished she had. The soft hum of village life surrounded her, children laughing in the distance, goats bleating, the pounding of fufu from a neighbor's kitchen. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was a small old mobile phone, the kind that was common in the village. Hardly anyone called Sarah, so the sound startled her. She quickly wiped her hands on her wrapper and picked up the phone, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was Ola. Ola, Sarah exclaimed, smiling as she answered the call. I haven't heard from you in weeks. How are you? Ola's voice came through, vibrant and full of life. Sarah, my sister, I'm fine. Oh, how is the village treating you? Sarah leaned back against the tree, her smile fading slightly. The same as always, Ola. Nothing changes here. Oh. Every day is the same. Farm work, market, and no hope for anything better. Ola's laughter rang out. But then, her tone turned serious. That's why I'm calling you, Sarah. I have some good news. There's a job opening here in Lagos, right near where I work. A big man is looking for a maid. Someone to help with cooking and cleaning. It's a good opportunity, Sarah. And I thought of you immediately. Sarah's heart leaped in her chest. A job in Lagos. It sounded like a dream, too good to be true. She sat up straight, gripping the phone tightly. Are you serious, Ola? A job in Lagos? Yes, Ola replied. The man is wealthy, very wealthy. His house is like something out of a movie. Big, beautiful, with everything you could ever imagine. I know how much you've been wanting to leave the village, Sarah. This could be your chance. Sarah's mind raced as she imagined the possibilities. Lagos, the city of endless opportunities. She had heard so many stories about the fast-paced life, the hustle and bustle, the money to be made. It was a world completely different from her life in Enugu Ezike. But at the same time, fear crept into her thoughts. She had never left the village, never lived anywhere but under the protective roof of her old house. What if it didn't work out? What if Lagos was too big, too fast, or too overwhelming? Ola, Sarah began, her voice uncertain. I don't know. I've never lived anywhere but here. I don't know if I'm ready for the city. Ola, sensing Sarah's hesitation, quickly reassured her. Sarah, I know it's scary, but you can't stay in that village forever. Look at me. I was afraid too, but coming to Lagos was the best decision I ever made. I've made good money here, and life is better than it ever was in the village. You can do this, Sarah. Don't let fear hold you back. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. She had spent so many years feeling trapped in Enugu Ezike, dreaming of something more but never knowing how to reach it. And now, here was her chance, right in front of her. A job in Lagos. The thought of leaving the village, of starting fresh in a place full of opportunities, was exhilarating. Olaf, she finally said, her voice filled with new determination. I'm going to do it. I will take the job. Ola cleared on the other end of the line. That's the spirit, Sarah. I know you had it in you. I'll speak to the man and tell him about you. You will need to come to Lagos soon for the interview. But don't worry, you can stay with me until you get settled. Sarah's mind was already racing with plans. She would have to tell her mother Martha about her decision to leave. It wouldn't be easy. Martha depended on Sarah for so many things, but Sarah knew deep down that her mother would understand. After all, Martha had always wanted more for her children, more than the hard life of farming and scraping by the village. After the call ended, Sarah sat under the mango tree for a long time, staring out at the horizon. Her heart was a mix of excitement and fear. Living in Enugu Ezike was a big step, one she had never imagined she would take. But Ola was right. She couldn't stay in the village forever. The thought of spending the rest of her life here, with no chance to grow, no opportunity to escape the poverty that surrounded them, was unbearable. That evening, Sarah sat down with her mother in their small kitchen, the glow of a kerosene lantern flickering against the walls. Martha was a strong woman, her face lined with the wrinkle of hard work and sacrifice. She had raised Sarah and her younger siblings on her own after their father passed away. And though life had been tough, Martha had always managed to keep the family together. Mama, Sarah began hesitantly. There is something I need to tell you. Martha looked up from where she was stirring a pot of soup. What is it, Sarah? Sarah took a deep breath. Ola called me today. She told me about a job in Lagos, working as a maid for a wealthy man. She said I should come for the interview. Martha's hand paused over the pot as she listened. She didn't say anything for a moment, and Sarah's heart raced as she waited for her mother's response. Finally, Martha spoke, her voice calm but serious. You've always wanted to leave the village, Sarah. You've dreamed of a better life, and I understand that. But Lagos is a big city, and life there is not easy. Are you sure you are ready for this? Sarah nodded, her voice filled with determination. I'm ready, Mama. I want to take this chance. I can't stay here forever. Working the farm and selling food in the market. I need to do something for myself, for my future, and for our family too. Martha sighed, her eyes softening as she looked at her daughter. You've grown up, Sarah. I can see that. If this is what you want, then I won't stand in your way. But be careful, my daughter. The city is full of temptations and dangers. Keep your heart clean and remember where you come from. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she embraced her mother. Thank you, Mama. I will make you proud. I promise. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Sarah packed her few belongings in a small bag, said her goodbyes to her siblings, and prepared for the journey ahead. As she boarded the bus to Lagos, her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was it, the beginning of a new life, a life she had dreamed of for so long. As the bus rumbled down the dusty road, leaving the familiar sights of Enugu Ezike. Sarah stared out the window, her mind filled with thoughts of the city that awaited her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt hopeful. Lagos was calling, and she was ready to answer. The bus ride from Enugu Ezike to Lagos was long and bumpy. Sarah barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed with what lay ahead of her. She had never traveled this far before, and the excitement of finally living in the village for the city was overwhelming. It was a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. Everything she had dreamed of was just hours away. The streets of Lagos, the opportunities, and the job Ola had secured for her seemed like the golden ticket to a new life. As the bus rolled into Lagos, the bustling city greeted Sarah with all its chaos and noise. The traffic was nothing like she had ever seen before. Cars, buses, and motorcycles honked their horns, competing for space on the crowded roads. People rushed past each other in a blur of colors, their faces set with purpose as they hurried to their destinations. The sheer size and energy of the city left Sarah feeling small and out of place, but also excited. This was where dreams could come true. After the bus came to a halt at a motor park, Sarah gathered her small bag and climbed down, stepping onto the cracked pavement of Lagos for the first time. She looked around, trying to take it all in. The tall buildings, the vendors calling out to sell their goods, the mix of different languages being spoken. It was all so different from the quiet life she had known in Enugu Ezike. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her back to reality. It was a message from Ola, who had been waiting for her arrival. "I'm at the gate of the park. Look out for a yellow taxi," Ola's message read. Sarah made her way through the throngs of people, her heart racing as she spotted a yellow taxi parked at the gate. Standing beside it was Ola, her face lighting up with a broad smile as soon as she saw Sarah. "Sarah!" Ola called out, rushing to embrace her. Sarah hugged her friend tightly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It was good to see a familiar face in this big city, overwhelming city. "Ola, I can't believe I'm really here," Sarah said, pulling back to look at her friend. Ola smiled warmly. "You made it. Welcome to Lagos, the land of hustle. I told you it's not like Enugu Ezike. You will get used to it though. Trust me, this place will grow on you." They both climbed into the taxi, and as they drove through the city, Sarah stared out of the window, her eyes wide with wonder. The skyscrapers loomed above, glittering in the sunlight, and the streets were packed with vendors selling everything from fruit to electronics. The noise of the city was constant, honking horns, music blaring from car speakers, and the chatter of people everywhere. "Lagos is something else," Sarah said in surprise. Ola laughed. "That's the city for you. It's tough, but once you find your way, it can be full of opportunities. Just stay sharp and don't let anyone take advantage of you." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb everything. She had no idea what to expect from her new life, but she was determined to make it work. The taxi eventually pulled up in front of a modest two-story building where Ola lived with three other girls who worked in the same area. It wasn't a fancy apartment by any means, but it was clean and safe, a far cry from the rundown houses back in the village. "This is where I live," Ola said, leading Sarah into the small comfortable apartment. "You can stay with us for now. It's not much, but it's home." Sarah set her bag down and looked around. The apartment was cramped, with a shared living room, two small bedrooms, and a kitchen. Still, it felt cozy, and the thought of being in Lagos with her friend filled her with excitement. "I'm just grateful to have a place to stay," Sarah said, smiling at Ola. "Good. I've already spoken to the man who is hiring. He wants to meet you tomorrow for the interview," Ola explained, sitting down on the couch and motioning for Sarah to join her. "He's a big man, Sarah, very rich and well connected. His house is like a palace, and if you get the job, you'll be set for life." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A job in a palace like home sounded like a dream come true. but it also made her nervous. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the man didn't like her? Ola seemed to sense her anxiety. Don't worry, Sarah. You've got this. You just need to be yourself. You are hardworking, and that is what matters. Just be confident. Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The idea of working for someone so wealthy was intimidating, but it was also the opportunity she had been waiting for. The next morning, Sarah dressed in her best clothes, a simple but clean outfit that she had brought from the village. Ola had helped her prepare, giving her tips on how to act and what to say during the interview. As they took a taxi to the employer's house, Sarah's nerves grew with every passing minute. When they finally arrived, Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. The house was enormous, with tall gates, a sprawling garden, and marble sets leading up to the front door. It looked like something out of a magazine, not the kind of place she had ever imagined setting foot in. This is it, Ola said with a grin. I told you, it's like a palace. Sarah nodded, swallowing her nerves as they approached the gate. A guard led them in, and they were escorted to the front of the house, where a housekeeper greeted them. You must be Sarah, the housekeeper said, smiling kindly. Come in, the boss is waiting for you. Sarah followed the housekeeper inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the outside. The floors gleamed with polished marble, and the walls were adorned with beautiful artwork. It was a far cry from the old modern house in Enugu. As they entered the living room, Sarah saw him, the man who would decide her fate. Daniel, the wealthy young man who owned the house, sat on a leather couch, casually scrolling through his phone. He was everything Ola had described: tall, handsome, and clearly well off. His presence exuded confidence and power. Daniel looked up as Sarah entered, his eyes sharp, taking in her presence. He stood up and approached her, his hand outstretched. You must be Sarah, he said with a warm smile. Ola had spoken highly of you. Sarah shook his hand, feeling a bit overwhelmed by his charm and the grandeur of the house. Yes, sir, I am Sarah, she replied softly. Please sit, Daniel said, gesturing to a nearby chair. I would like to get to know you a bit better. As Sarah sat down, her nerves started to settle. Daniel asked her questions about her experience, her family, and her reasons for wanting to work in Lagos. She answered as confidently as she could, explaining how she had grown up in the village and worked hard to support her family. She spoke of her dreams of building a better life in the city and how she was ready to take on any challenge. Daniel listened intently, nodding as she spoke. He seemed impressed by her determination and work ethic. Sarah, I'm looking for someone who can handle the responsibilities of this house, Daniel said after a pause. Cooking, cleaning, and maintaining the order of things. It's a big job, but I believe you are capable of it. If you are willing to work hard, I'm willing to offer you the position. Sarah's heart soared. She had done it. She had secured the job. I will work hard, sir, she said, her voice filling with gratitude. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Daniel smiled. I believe you will. Welcome to the team, Sarah. You can start tomorrow. That night, as Sarah lay in the small bed in Ola's apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about how her life was about to change. She had come from a small forgotten village, and now she was about to work in a mansion for one of the wealthiest men she had ever met. Everything seemed like a dream. But as much as Sarah was excited, there was also a strange feeling growing inside her, a mixture of desire and ambition. She had seen how wealthy Daniel was, how powerful he seemed, and as much as she was grateful for the job, a small dangerous thought began to creep into her mind. What if, somehow, Daniel could be more than just her employer? What if she could find a way to become closer to him, to make him notice her in ways that went beyond work? Sarah quickly pushed these thoughts away, but it lingered in the back of her mind, like a whisper, feeding into her growing ambition. She didn't just want to work for Daniel, she wanted to be noticed by him, to be special. As sleep finally overtook her, Sarah dreamed of a life where she wasn't just a maid in Daniel's house, but something much more. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to make the most of her life in Lagos. The first few weeks at Daniel's mansion passed in a blur for Sarah. She quickly fell into a routine of cooking, cleaning, and managing the household's daily affairs. The house was grand, almost overwhelming, with its high ceilings and gleaming floors, but Sarah adapted. She worked hard and did her best to remain invisible, just as a good maid should. Yet, no matter how much she tried to focus on her work, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. Daniel was everything Sarah had imagined a man of his wealth and status to be. He was charming, intelligent, and always impeccably dressed. He carried himself with an air of confidence that made people respect him without him having to say much. Every time he walked into a room, Sarah's heart would race. She found herself stealing glances at him whenever she thought he wasn't looking, watching the way he moved, the way he smiled when he spoke on the phone with his girlfriend Emily. It didn't take long for the dangerous thoughts Sarah had tried to suppress to surface once again. She began imagining what it would be like if Daniel noticed her, not as a maid, but as something more. But every time she saw Emily, the beautiful girlfriend who visited often, her heart would sink. Emily was perfect, poised, well dressed, and clearly in love with Daniel. Sarah couldn't compete with someone like her. She was just a village girl, a maid. What chance did she have? Still, the fantasies persisted, and as time went on, they grew more vivid, more consuming. Every time she prepared Daniel's meals or cleaned his study, she wondered if there was a way to make him see her differently. She imagined herself by his side, living the life she had only dreamed of. But how could she make that happen? One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Sarah returned to Ola's apartment, exhausted but restless. Ola was already home, lounging on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. The two friends hadn't had much time to talk since Sarah started her new job. But tonight, something in Sarah's demeanor caught Ola's attention. "You look like you've got something on your mind," Ola said, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should say what she was thinking about. But Ola was her closest friend. She had always been open with her, so she decided to speak her mind. "It's Daniel," Sarah began, sitting down beside Ola. "I can't stop thinking about him." Ola laughed, a knowing look on her face. "I knew it wouldn't take long before you started feeling like that. He's a handsome man, and rich too. It's hard not to get swept up." Sarah nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed. "But he has a girlfriend, Emily. She's always around, and he clearly loves her." Ola took a sip of her wine and shrugged. "So what? You think that matters? Men like Daniel, they always have someone. But that doesn't mean you can't be the one to take him away." Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean? How can I even compete with someone like Emily? I'm just the maid." Ola leaned in, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and experience. "Let me tell you something, Sarah. You think Emily's got all because she's the girlfriend. But trust me, nothing is guaranteed. You've got to shine your eyes, as they say. If you sit back and do nothing, another woman will come along and take him. And where will that leave you?" Sarah felt a pang of curiosity mixed with fear. "But how? I wouldn't even know where to start." Ola smiled slyly. "Let me tell you a little secret about me. You know my boss, right? That one I work for." Sarah nodded. Ola had mentioned her boss in passing, but she had never gone into details about him. "Well," Ola continued, lowering her voice, "he is married, has a wife and kids, but they live abroad. And he's here most of the time alone. Let's just say we have an understanding. He takes care of me, and in return, I make sure he's not lonely." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "You're having an affair with your boss?" Ola laughed. "It's not an affair if his wife is halfway across the world and doesn't care what he does. Look, Sarah, men like my boss and Daniel too, they have everything, but they always look for something more. You just have to make them notice you. Once you get their attention, you can get anything you want." Sarah's heart raced as she listened to Ola. Could she really do what Ola was suggesting? Could she actually make a move on Daniel, knowing he had a girlfriend? But how do I even get his attention? Sarah asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. He barely notices me, and when Emily is around, it's like I don't exist. Ola leaned back, considering Sarah's questions for a moment. You've got to start small. Be around him more, but don't be obvious about it. When you are cleaning, make sure you are close enough for him to see you. When you cook for him, make the meals extra special, something he will remember. Men are simple, Sarah. They like attention, and if you give him enough of it, he will start to notice you. But if that doesn't work, Ola's voice trailed off, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. What? Sarah pressed, leaning forward. If that doesn't work, what do I do? Ola's eyes glinted with something dark and dangerous. If it doesn't work, I will tell you the next step. But for now, just try to get his attention the natural way. If you play your cards right, you won't even need to go any further. Sarah's mind was spinning with everything Ola had said. She had always admired her friend for her boldness, but this was different. This was risky. Still, the idea of getting Daniel's attention, of possibly being more than just his maid, was intoxicating. She had come to Lagos for a better life, and this seemed like her own chance. I don't know, Ola, Sarah said, her voice filled with doubt. What if it all goes wrong? What if he never notices me? Ola waved her hand dismissively. You will never know unless you try. And trust me, men like Daniel are never fully satisfied. He may have a girlfriend, but that doesn't mean he's not looking for something new, something different. Just be patient. Sarah thought about Ola's word long after their conversation ended. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ola was right. If she didn't act soon, someone else might come along and take the opportunity that was right in front of her. But the thought of trying to get Daniel's attention made her nervous. What if he rejected her? What if he fired her for being too forward? The next day at work, Sarah found herself watching Daniel more closely than usual. He was always busy, either on the phone with clients or going through paperwork in his study. But now, with Ola's advice in the back of her mind, Sarah started to find small ways to be around him. She made sure to clean his study when he was inside, dusting the shelves and arranging the books while trying to not look too obvious. She began preparing his favorite meals, adding little touches that she hoped would make him notice her efforts. But no matter what she did, Daniel seemed oblivious. He thanked her for the food, complimented her cooking, but beyond that, there was nothing. He remained focused on his work. And when Emily came over, he was all smiles and affection. Sarah felt invisible. Days passed, and Sarah's frustration grew. She had followed Ola's advice, but nothing seemed to be working. Daniel still treated her like the maid, and Emily was still very much in the picture. Sarah started to wonder if she had been foolish to even think she had a chance. That evening, after another long day, Sarah returned to the apartment. Her mood sour. Ola noticed right away. What is wrong? Ola asked as Sarah slumped onto the couch. I've tried everything, Sarah said. I've done everything you told me to do, but still, he doesn't notice me. It's like I'm not even there. Ola's expression softened. I told you men like him take time, but it's not working. Maybe it's time to take things to the next level. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Ola leaned in closer, her voice low and serious. If he's not responding to the way you want, you might need to give him a little push. Something that will make him see you, really see you. Sarah's mind raced. What are you suggesting? Ola's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Sarah saw something unsettling in her friend's gaze. There's a way to get his attention, Sarah. It's not conventional, but it works. I used it with my boss, and let's just say he's been hooked ever since. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? Ola's lips coiled into a sly smile. There are people, powerful people, who can help you. They can give you something that will make Daniel fall for you, no matter how much he loves his girlfriend. It's not something to take lightly, but if you really want him, this is the way to do it. Sarah stared at Ola, her heart racing. The idea of using something unnatural to make Daniel fall in love with her was both terrifying and tempting. She had heard stories back in the village about people who had gone to juju priests or witch doctors to get what they wanted: love, money, power, but she had never imagined herself being one of those people. Yet, here she was, faced with the possibility of doing something she had only heard about in whispered conversations. Ola, are you serious? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You really did that with your boss? Ola nodded, her expression deadly serious. Yes, he was never going to notice me otherwise. He's married, after all, and he was always thinking about his wife and kids. But after I went to see someone, let's just say his attention shifted to me. He sends me money, buys me gifts, and takes care of me like I'm the only woman in his life. His family is still abroad, but I'm the one who is here with him. Sarah's mind spun with the implications of what Ola was saying. Could she really do this? Could she go to someone to get help to make Daniel fall in love with her? The thought of it made her stomach turn, but at the same time, the idea of finally getting what she wanted was intoxicating. But what if it goes wrong? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. What if something bad happens? Ola shrugged. Nothing will happen as long as you follow the instructions. It's not like the movies where everything goes wrong and people get cursed. You just have to be smart about it. These people know what they are doing. You will get what you want and Daniel will be yours. Sarah sat back, staring at her hands. This was a line she had never imagined crossing. But Ola made it sound so easy, so tempting. She thought about her life in Enugu, how hard things had been, and how much she wanted something better for herself. She had come to Lagos for a better life, and now that opportunity was right in front of her. Think about it, Sarah. Ola continued, her voice soft but persuasive. You've already tried everything else, and it's not working. This is your chance to get what you deserve. Daniel is a big fish, and if you don't act now, someone else will do. Do you really want to sit back and let another woman take what could be yours? The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Ola was right. If she didn't act, someone else would. Daniel was the kind of man every woman wanted. Handsome, rich, powerful, and she wasn't the only one who had noticed. If she didn't make a move, someone else would. Sarah took a deep breath, her decision forming in her mind. Okay, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. I'll do it. I'll see this person. Ola smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. Good. I'll take you to someone who can help you. But remember, once you start, there's no going back. You have to follow the instructions exactly, or it could fall all apart. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. She was stepping into unknown territory, but if it meant getting Daniel's attention, it would be worth it. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to turn back now. The following weekend, Ola made good on her promise. She took Sarah to a small building on the outskirts of Lagos. The streets were quieter here, far from the bustling city center. As they approached the building, Sarah's heart raced. It looked like an ordinary house, but the air around it felt heavy, as if something unseen was lurking just beneath the surface. This is the place, Ola said, her voice low. The man inside is powerful. He will know what to do. Sarah swallowed hard, her palms sweaty as she followed Ola inside. The interior of the house was dimly lit, with old wooden furniture and the faint smell of incense in the air. A man, older and thin, with deep-set eyes, sat behind a table covered in strange objects, herbs, small clay pots, and what looked like animal bones. Ola greeted the man respectfully, and after a brief exchange in a language Sarah didn't fully understand, the man turned his attention to her. "You want to capture the heart of a man," the man said, his voice low and gravely. It wasn't a question, but a statement, as if he already knew why she was there. Sarah nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The man gestured for her to say it, and as she did, he began to explain what needed to be done. He handed her a small clay pot, much like the ones she had seen in stories from the village. The instructions were simple but unsettling. Every day, Sarah was to urinate inside the pot and use that liquid to cook Daniel's meals. The man explained that with each meal, Daniel would grow more and more attracted to her, the love for Emily fading away until Sarah was the only woman he could think of. "But you must not stop until he marries you," the man warned, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "If you stop too soon, or if anyone finds the pot, the spell will break and he will be lost to you." Sarah's stomach churned at the thought of what she was about to do, but she nodded, determined to see it through. She had come too far to turn back now. The man blessed the pot with a strange chant, and after thanking him, Ola and Sarah left the house. As they walked back to the bus stop, Ola turned to her friend, her eyes serious. "Now, the real work begins," Ola said. "You have to be careful. Don't let anyone see that pot, and don't stop until you have him." Sarah nodded, clutching the small clay pot tightly in her hands. She was about to embark on a dangerous path, but the promise of Daniel's love kept her fear at bay. She had always wanted a better life, and now she was going to get it. Back at Daniel's mansion, Sarah hid the pot beneath her bed, just as the man had instructed. Every day, she followed the ritual, urinating into the pot and using the liquid to prepare Daniel's meals. At first, she felt sickened by what she was doing, but with each passing day, her resolve grew stronger. As the weeks went by, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in Daniel's behavior. He started to spend more time around her, complimenting her cooking and asking her about her day. He seemed more relaxed when he was with her and less attentive to Emily when she visited. It was working. Then, one evening, something happened that shook Sarah to her core. Emily came by for dinner as usual, but this time, Daniel barely acknowledged her presence. He was distant, distracted, and when Emily tried to talk to him, he responded with vague, uninterested answers. Sarah watched from the kitchen, her heart pounding with excitement. The spell was taking hold. Later that night, as Emily left, visibly upset by Daniel's coldness, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had done it. Daniel was starting to see her, really see her, and soon he would be hers completely. The following days at Daniel's mansion were a whirlwind of change for Sarah. With every meal she prepared using the strange mixture, Daniel seemed to drift further away from Emily and closer to her. It was as though a fog had settled over him, making him forget the woman he had once loved so dearly. Each time Sarah served him food, she watched carefully, noticing how his demeanor softened towards her and hardened whenever Emily's name was mentioned. It wasn't long before Daniel's calls to Emily became less frequent, and her visits even rarer. The tension in the house grew, but Sarah basked in the transformation. The subtle glances Daniel now gave her were no longer the indifferent ones of an employer to his maid. They were charged with something else, something deeper. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with just fleeting attention. She wanted more. She wanted all of Daniel's affections and commitment. She wanted to be the one he thought about, the one he couldn't live without. And as Ola had advised her, she had to shine her eyes and seize the opportunity. One evening, after a particularly intimate dinner, Daniel sat across from Sarah, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her heart race. His usual charm had softened into something more vulnerable, and if he was seeing her in a new light, he set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, he said, his voice low. I don't know what it is, but lately I've been thinking about you a lot. Sarah felt a rush of triumph, but she kept her expression composed. She had to be careful not to seem too eager. Instead, she lowered her gaze shyly and gave a soft, almost bashful smile. I'm just here to do my job, sir, she replied, though inside her heart was pounding. But I'm glad you are pleased with my work. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. It's more than that. You are more than that. I can't explain it, but I feel connected to you somehow. Sarah's stomach fluttered, but she knew better than to push too hard too soon. The pot's power was working, but the witch doctor's words echoed in her mind. Do not stop until he marries you. She had to keep feeding him the enchanted muse and followed the plan precisely. But things weren't entirely smooth sailing. Daniel sat down to dinner once again. Sarah served him his favorite meal, careful to follow the same ritual she had been practicing for weeks. As Daniel took his first bite, he looked up at her, his gaze filled with something new, something Sarah had been waiting for all along. Desire. You're different from any woman I've ever met, Daniel said, his voice soft as he reached for her hand. Sarah's heart leaped, but she remained calm. She had him now, and she knew it. But there was still one more step to go. She couldn't stop now, not until he was completely hers. Thank you, sir, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just glad to be here. Daniel smiled, pulling her closer. Sarah, I don't know what it is about you, but I feel like I can't stop thinking about you, like I need you in my life. As Sarah looked into his eyes, she knew that the spell was almost complete. Soon, Daniel would be hers, and nothing, not even Emily, could stand in her way. But she also knew that there was still danger lurking. The pot beneath her bed was the key to everything, and if anyone found it, the spell would be broken. Sarah's world was beginning to change in ways she had only dreamed of. Each day that passed brought Daniel closer to her and further from Emily. The distance between Daniel and his longtime girlfriend grew more apparent with every meal Sarah prepared, with every interaction she subtly controlled. The power of the clay pot beneath her bed seemed undeniable, and Daniel was slowly but surely slipping out of Emily's grasp. Sarah was careful not to celebrate too early. She knew better than to act too confident before the final step was completed. The witch doctor's words echoed in her mind. You must not stop until he marries you. And though Daniel's behavior was changing rapidly, Sarah knew she needed to be patient. Soon, the final blow would come, and Emily would be completely out of the picture. Days passed, and Daniel seemed more and more distracted whenever Emily's name came up. He would sigh or brush off conversations about her, and his time with Sarah grew longer. He sought her out in the evenings, staying close to her in ways that had once been unimaginable. His once frequent calls to Emily had become so distant, and their meetings were few and far between. Then one day, everything came to a head. It was a bright Saturday afternoon when Emily decided to visit Daniel. She hadn't heard from him in nearly a week, and her heart was heavy with worry. Things between them had been strained for some time, but Emily refused to believe that their relationship was truly in danger. They had been together for years, and though Daniel had grown distant, she thought they could work things out. Arriving at Daniel's mansion, Emily felt a strange sense of unease as she walked through the gates. The house that had once felt like a second home to her now seemed cold and unwelcoming. The beautiful garden, which she had always admired, felt oddly lifeless. She tried to shake off the feeling as she approached the front door. Emily knocked, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal Sarah standing in the entranceway. Sarah smiled politely, but behind her eyes, there was something different, something smug. Emily, Sarah greeted her, her voice sweet, but with an undercurrent of triumph that only Emily could sense. Daniel is in the living room. He's been expecting you. Emily nodded, though a small knot of dread formed in her stomach as she stepped inside. Sarah's presence had always been unassuming, but now Emily felt as though she was being silently challenged by the young maid. Brushing off the feeling, she moved towards the living room, her heart heavy with anticipation. When she entered the living room, Daniel was seated on the couch, a drink on his hand. His expression was unreadable, and he didn't rise to greet her as he normally would have. Instead, he simply watched her as she approached. Daniel, Emily began, her voice soft. We need to talk. Daniel set his drink down on the table, his gaze still fixed on her. What is it, Emily? Emily's heart sank as the coldness in his tone. She could feel the distance between them, like a charm that had grown wider in every passing day. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. You've been avoiding me, Emily said, and her voice trembling slightly. I don't understand what's going on. We haven't spoken in days, and when we do, you are so distant. You are always in a hurry to go off the line. I need to know. Are we okay? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. His frustration was evident, but there was something else in his eyes, something distant and detached. Emily, he began, his tone flat. I think we need to talk about our relationship. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The way he said our relationship made her stomach twist. She had been expecting a different conversation, but this felt like the beginning of the end. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel stood up, turning away from her as he spoke. I don't think this is working anymore. Things between us, they've changed. Emily's hand clenched at her sides, her breath catching in her throat. Changed? Daniel, we've been together for years. What do you mean things have changed? Daniel's back was still turned to her, his voice cold and detached. I don't feel the same way anymore. I've been thinking about it for a whole while now, and I think it's best if we go our separate ways. The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. How had things fallen apart so quickly? How had the man she loved, the man she thought loved her, come to this conclusion without her even realizing it? Daniel, no, Emily said, her voice breaking. You can't just throw away what we have. We've been through so much together. Please, we can walk through this. Daniel turned around to face her, but his expression was blank, his eyes cold. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm not interested in this relationship anymore. The finality of his words left Emily reeling. She took a step back, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted. How could this be happening? How could everything she had built with Daniel fall apart so suddenly? I love you, Emily whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. We can fix this. We can make it work. Daniel shook his head, his tone unwavering. I don't think I love you anymore, Emily. The room felt silent, and for a moment, all Emily could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking. She stared at Daniel, searching for any sign of the man she had loved, the man who had once loved her, but all she saw was cold indifference. From the corner of her eye, Emily noticed Sarah standing by the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her presence made Emily's stomach turn. There was something in the way Sarah stood there. Her posture relaxed, her lips slightly curved into a smile. It was as if she was enjoying watching Emily's world crumble. Emily turned back to Daniel, desperation in her voice. Please, Daniel, don't do this. But Daniel's gaze was unmoved. It's over, Emily. The finality in his word crushed any remaining hope Emily had. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the house, her vision blurred by tears. As Emily passed Sarah in the hallway, She felt an overwhelming sense of anger and betrayal. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, she knew that Sarah had something to do with this. The way the maid looked at her, with that smug expression, confirmed what Emily had feared for weeks. There was more to Sarah than met the eye. When Emily left, the door closing behind her with a soft thud, Sarah could barely contain her excitement. She had won. Emily was out of the picture, and Daniel was hers now. She had played her part perfectly, and now all she had to do was wait for the final step. Daniel returned to the living room, a look of frustration on his face, but Sarah could tell that he wasn't truly upset about Emily. He sat down, rubbing his temples as if trying to shake off the weight of what had just happened. "Are you okay, sir?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle as she approached him. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes softening. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know what's happening to me. I used to love Emily, but now it's like I can't even remember anything or the reason why." Sarah's heart swelled with satisfaction. The spell was working exactly as planned. Soon, Daniel wouldn't remember Emily at all. He would only think of her, Sarah, the woman who had been by his side all along. "Sometimes things changed," Sarah said, sitting down beside him. "Feelings changed. Maybe it's just time for something new." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "Maybe you are right." The tension between them was palpable, and Sarah knew that the time was near. The pot beneath her bed was working its magic, and soon Daniel would be hers completely. She had done everything right, and now it was only a matter of time before he asked her to be more than just his maid. As she sat beside him, her heart racing with excitement, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Everything was falling into place, just as she had planned. But what Sarah didn't know was that sometimes even the best laid plans comes with a price, and the cost of her victory would soon be more than she had ever imagined. Sarah's victory over Emily had left her elated. She had successfully drawn Daniel away from his longtime girlfriend, and now it felt like nothing could stand in her way. Daniel was slipping further and further under her spell, and with every meal, every interaction, she felt her power over him grow. But Sarah knew she had to be careful. The final step in the plan was near, and she had to ensure that Daniel was completely hers before he even considered looking back. For days after his breakup with Emily, Daniel had been quiet and withdrawn, unsure of himself. The relationship that had once meant the whole world to him now seemed like a distant memory. He couldn't understand why he felt so disconnected. But every time Sarah was around, her presence seemed to comfort him. She was always there, always attentive. And as the days passed, Daniel found himself leaning more and more on her. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel sat alone in the living room, nursing a glass of wine. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah had finished her duties for the day, but she lingered, sensing that the moment she had been waiting for was near. Daniel looked up as Sarah entered the room. Her steps soft and graceful. She wore a simple dress, but it hugged her figure in a way that made her look effortlessly alluring. She had always been careful about how she presented herself around him, never too obvious, but always tempting enough to draw his eyes. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, approaching him, "you've been looking so tired lately. Is everything alright with you?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Sarah. Things has just been strange. I don't feel like myself anymore." Sarah sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "Maybe you just need to relax. You've been through a lot lately. Sometimes it helps to let go." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she moved, that was beginning to stir something inside him, something he had tried to ignore. She wasn't just his maid anymore, she was becoming more than that. Sarah smiled softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. You know, you don't have to carry all this stress alone. I'm here for you. The touch of her hand sent a shiver through Daniel. He knew he shouldn't be feeling this way. She was his maid, after all, but the connection he once had with Emily was gone. And here was Sarah, offering him comfort and something more. The weight of his breakup and the confusion swirling in his mind made him vulnerable, and Sarah was ready to take advantage of it. Maybe you're right, Daniel murmured, his voice soft. Sarah's smile widened ever so slightly. She had him exactly where she wanted him. Without saying another word, she leaned in, her lips brushing softly against his. For a brief moment, Daniel hesitated, but the spell was too strong. The feelings that had been manipulated for weeks now overtook his common sense. His hand moved to her waist, pulling her closer as they kissed. Sarah could feel the rush of triumph in her veins. This was the moment she had been waiting for. And now Daniel was hers. She knew that once he crossed this line, there would be no going back. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat in a small cafe with her best friend Grace. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she recounted everything that had happened between her and Daniel over the past few weeks. Grace listened intently, her face a mix of concern and disbelief. I just don't understand, Emily said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. It's like he's not the same person anymore. One day he loves me, and the next, he barely knows who I am. And that maid, Sarah, I can't shake the feeling that she has something to do with it. Grace frowned. You think the maid is involved? Emily nodded. I know it sounds crazy, but every time I see her, it's like she's watching me, waiting for me to leave. And then is always acting strange when she's around. I don't know how to explain it, but something doesn't feel right here. Grace leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had known Emily and Daniel for years, and this sudden change in their relationship was unsettling. But Emily's suspicion about the maid made her uneasy. What if there was something more going on than they realized? I think we need to get to the bottom of this, Grace said firmly. Have you thought about speaking to someone? Maybe a pastor or a spiritual leader. Sometimes there are things happening that we can't explain, things that go beyond what we see. Emily looked at her friend, her eyes filled with desperation. You think a pastor could help? Grace nodded. I know a man of God. He helped people in situations like this before. Maybe he can reveal what's really going on. Emily hesitated for a moment, but the gnawing feelings in her gut wouldn't go away. She had tried everything else, and nothing had worked. If there was even a chance that something supernatural was at play, she had to find out. All right, Emily said, her voice trembling. Let's go see him. The next day, Grace and Emily made their way to the church of the man of God Grace had spoken about. It was a modest building, but the moment they stepped inside, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. The pastor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, greeted them warmly. Welcome, the pastor said, motioning them for them to sit down. How can I help you? Emily explained everything, how Daniel had changed, how their relationship had fallen apart so suddenly, and her suspicions about Sarah. The pastor listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, as if deep in thought. This is a serious matter, the pastor said finally, but I believe the Lord can reveal the truth. I will pray for you, but first you must fast. For 3 days, you and your friend must fast and seek God's guidance. After that, return to me and we will see what the Lord has to say. Emily's heart raced. 3 days of fasting sounded difficult, but it meant finding out what was happening to Daniel. She was willing to do it. Thank you, Pastor, Emily said, her voice filled with gratitude. For now, the pastor continued, pray and keep your heart open to the truth. God will reveal what is hidden. The next 3 days were some of the most difficult Emily had ever experienced. She and Grace fasted, obtaining from food and praying for hours on end. Emily poured out her heart to God, asking for answers, for a way to save Daniel and their relationship. She had felt so lost, but the fasting gave her a sense of purpose, a sense that she was fighting for the man she loved. On the third day, exhausted and weak from fasting, Emily and Grace returned to the church. The pastor was waiting for them, and as they entered, he greeted them with a calm but serious expression. You have done well, the pastor said. Now let us pray. They sat down in the small church, and the pastor began to pray over them. His voice was strong and clear. As he prayed, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as if the air around them grew heavier, and a warmth spread through her chest. After a few minutes, the pastor's prayers slowed, and he placed his hands on Emily's head. The Lord is showing me something, he said, his voice deepening. There is a woman, someone close to the man you love. She has been working against you, using dark forces to turn him away from you. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Sarah, she whispered. The pastor nodded. Yes, she is not acting alone. There is something she has been using, something hidden that is keeping him under her control. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. What can I do? How can I stop this? The pastor's gaze was steady. There is a clay pot hidden in her room. It holds the power of the spell. You must destroy it. Once it's broken, the spell will be lifted, and he will be free. Emily and Grace exchanged a look of determination. They knew what they had to do. When you go to him, the pastor continued, bring someone with you. You cannot face this alone, but be brave, for the Lord is with you. Emily's hand trembled as she thanked the pastor, her mind racing with the task ahead. She had never imagined that something so sinister could be behind Daniel's change. But now, everything made sense. Sarah wasn't just a maid. She was a threat, and Emily would do whatever it took to free Daniel from her clutches. Sarah had been feeling triumphant for weeks now. Her hold on Daniel had grown stronger with each passing day, and their relationship had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined. From subtle glances and stolen moments, Sarah had slowly drawn Daniel into her world. They were no longer just maid and master. They had crossed into something much more personal. And now, she had news that would change everything. That morning, as Daniel was getting ready for work, Sarah felt a surge of excitement bubbling inside her. She had taken a pregnancy test the night before, and the results had confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. The idea of carrying Daniel's child filled her with a sense of power and triumph. She had not only won his heart, but she was also carrying his legacy. She knew that telling him would solidify everything. There was no way Daniel could turn away from her now. He was hers, and soon they would have a family. But deep down, Sarah knew that her secret weapon, the pot hidden beneath her bed, still held everything together. Without it, Daniel could revert to his old self, and she wasn't willing to take that risk. That morning, she waited for the perfect moment to share the news. Daniel, still groggy from sleep, was still at the dining table, sipping his coffee. His mood seemed lighter than usual, though Sarah noticed a strange distant look in his eyes, as if he was wrestling with something deep within him. But she brushed it off. After all, the spell was still working, and soon they would have even more to celebrate. She approached him quietly, a soft smile playing on her lips. Daniel, there is something I need to tell you. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes tired but curious. What is it, Sarah? She sat down beside him, placing a hand on her stomach. Her heart raced with excitement as she spoke. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Daniel seemed frozen. His coffee cup hovered in midair. and he stared at Sarah as though trying to process what she had just said. Slowly, he set the cup down on the table and leaned back in his chair. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her smile widening. Yes, you're going to be a father. A strange mix of emotions flickered across Daniel's face: surprise, confusion, and something else. His initial reaction was one of shock, but after a moment, his expression softened and he reached out to take her hand. That's incredible news, Sarah, he said, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm she had hoped for. He smiled at her, but there was something off about it, as if he was trying to convince himself that he was happy. We are going to have a baby. Sarah beamed, but she couldn't help but notice the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Daniel seemed disconnected, as if a part of him was still questioning everything that had happened between them. But she didn't dwell on it. The spell was still strong, and with the pregnancy now a part of the equation, she was certain that he would come around fully. We should start planning, Sarah said eagerly. There is so much to do: appointments, baby clothes, and everything. Daniel nodded absently, but his thoughts seemed elsewhere. He couldn't explain it, but something about the news left him feeling off. His connection with Sarah had deepened over the past few weeks, but now, as he sat there, holding her hand, a strange sense of unease settled over him. He felt like he was being pulled into two different directions, and he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Across town, Emily sat in her apartment with her best friend Grace, the weight of the pastor's revelation still heavy on her shoulders. The fast had been difficult, but it had opened her eyes to the truth. Sarah wasn't just a maid, she was using dark forces to control Daniel. And now, Emily knew what had to be done. They had to destroy the clay pot that held the spell. But that task ahead felt daunting. Getting the pot out of Daniel's house wouldn't be easy, especially with Sarah always looking around. Emily wasn't even sure how to approach Daniel anymore. He had pushed her away, and even though she knew he wasn't himself, confronting him felt like walking into enemy territory. Grace, sensing Emily's anxiety, broke the silence. We have to be smart about this, Emily. We can't just walk into his house and take the pot. Sarah will be watching, and if we are not careful, she will make things worse. Emily nodded, her heart heavy with worry. I know, but what can we do? We can't just let her keep controlling him. He is not the man I know anymore. Grace thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she considered their options. Then, an idea struck her. What about Amanda? Emily looked at her, confused. Amanda? Daniel's sister? Grace nodded. Yes, she's the only one who could get into that house without raising suspicion. If we can explain everything to her, she might be able to help us. She's family, and Sarah won't see her as a threat. Emily's eyes lit up with hope. Sarah hadn't thought about Amanda, but now that Grace had mentioned it, it made sense. Amanda was close to Daniel, and she had always been protective of her brother. If anyone could help, it would be her. You are right, Emily said, her voice filled with determination. I'll call Amanda. She had to know what is happening. Later that afternoon, Emily reached out to Amanda, her hands trembling as she dialed the number. It has been a while since they had spoken, but Emily knew she had to explain everything, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. When Amanda answered the phone, her voice was warm and familiar, though there was an underlying tone of concern. Emily, it's been so long. How are you? Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Amanda, I need your help. It's about Daniel. Something is wrong. The concern in Amanda's voice deepened. What do you mean? What's going on? Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain everything. But then the words came pouring out. She told Amanda about the sudden change in Daniel's behavior, how he had pushed her away and seemed like a different person. She explained her suspicions about Sarah and the dark forces at play. She told her about the pastor's revelation and the clay pot hidden in the house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Emily feared that Amanda wouldn't believe her. But then Amanda spoke, her voice firm and resolute. I know something was off, Amanda said, her tone serious. I've noticed it in the way he talks to me, like he's not himself. If what you're saying is true, we have to act fast. I'll come to Lagos as soon as I can. We'll figure out a plan to get that pot out of the house. Relief washed over Emily, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Amanda's involvement meant they had a real chance of freeing Daniel from Sarah's clutches. Thank you, Amanda, Emily said, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would do without your help. Amanda's voice was calm but determined. We will get him back, Emily. Don't worry. Just hold on a little longer. 2 days later, Amanda arrived in Lagos, ready to confront the situation head on. She met with Emily and Grace at a small cafe, where they discussed their plan in detail. Amanda, always the practical one, was focused and strategic, determined to save her brother from whatever dark forces had ensnared him. We can't just barge in, Amanda said, her eyes sharp with determination. Sarah will be on high alert, especially now that she's got Daniel wrapped around her finger. We need to find a way to get her out of the house, long enough for me to get in and find the pot. Grace nodded in agreement. But how do we do that? Sarah is always there. She never leaves his side. Amanda thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. We will have to create a distraction, something that will pull Sarah away from the house. Maybe a fake emergency or a situation that requires her immediate attention. While she's gone, I will go in and find the pot. Emily's heart raced as they planned. The stakes were high, and the thought of confronting Sarah filled her with fear. But she knew they had no other choice. If they didn't act soon, Daniel would be lost to them forever. Amanda placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. We will get through this, just trust me. Emily nodded, her heart filled with both hope and fear. The plan was set, but the hardest part was yet to come. As they left the cafe, Emily glanced at Amanda, grateful for her support. With Amanda on their side, they had a real chance of freeing Daniel. But deep down, Emily knew that things were about to get dangerous. Sarah had always proven she was willing to go to the greatest length to keep Daniel. And there was no telling what she would do if she found out their plan. But no matter the risk, Emily was ready. She would fight for Daniel with everything she had. The next morning, Amanda stood at the entrance of Daniel's mansion, her face calm but her mind racing. The plan had been carefully laid out, but now that the moment was upon them, the weight of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. She knew there was no room for mistakes. Emily and Grace waited anxiously at a nearby cafe, ready to hear from Amanda the moment the pot was found and destroyed. If they failed today, they might never have another chance to free Daniel from Sarah's dark influence. Amanda took a deep breath and knocked on the door. It wasn't long before Sarah opened it, her face lighting up in surprise. Amanda, I wasn't expecting you, Sarah said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Amanda forced herself to smile back. I thought I would drop by and see how Daniel is doing. It's been a while. Sarah stepped aside, letting Amanda in. Of course, he's been a bit under the weather, but I'm sure he will be happy to see you. Amanda walked through the grand hall. Her eyes scanned the surroundings. She had been to Daniel's house many times before, but now every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to hold a hidden secret. The clay pot that held the power over her brother could be anywhere, and she had no idea how much time she would have to find it. Sarah led Amanda into the living room where Daniel sat, staring out the window. His usual sharpness and energy were gone, replaced by a blank, almost hollow expression. He looked up when Amanda entered, but there was a detachment in his gaze that made her heart ache. This wasn't her brother anymore. He was a shadow of the man she once knew. Amanda, Daniel said, his voice flat. "It's good to see you." "You too," Amanda replied, trying to hide her concern. "How have you been?" Daniel shrugged, glancing at Sarah. "I'm fine, I guess, just tired." Sarah moved towards him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "He's been working hard. It's good that you came to visit." Amanda's stomach turned as she watched the interaction between them. Sarah's control over Daniel was stronger than she had imagined, and she knew time was running out. But she couldn't act suspiciously, not yet. "I was thinking," Amanda said, turning her attention to Sarah. "Since I'm here, maybe we could spend some time together. There is this new shop in town I've been dying to check out. Why don't you come with me? It will be fun." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Daniel. "I don't know. Daniel hasn't been feeling great. I should probably stay." Amanda's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice light. "Come on, you'll be fine for a few hours, and you deserve a break. You've been taking such good care of him." Sarah looked conflicted for a moment, but Amanda could see her resolve weakening. "I suppose I could go for a little while." Daniel, seemingly uninterested in the conversation, nodded absent-mindedly. "I'll be fine, Sarah. Go ahead." With a small smile, Sarah agreed. "All right, just let me grab my things." As soon as Sarah disappeared into the other room, Amanda moved quickly. She had no idea how much time she had before Sarah returned. But this was her chance. She needed to find that pot and destroy it before Sarah could stop her. Amanda rushed upstairs, her mind racing as she tried to think of where Sarah might have hidden it. The bedroom was the most likely place, so she headed there first, her heart pounding in her chest. She entered the room and immediately began searching, pulling open drawers and looking under the bed. Nothing. Frustration built inside her as precious minutes ticked by. She knew she didn't have much time, and the pressure was mounting. Amanda crouched down and checked under the bed again, this time reaching further. Her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. Her heart leaped. Pulling the object out from the underbed, Amanda found it. A small clay pot, just as Emily had described. It was unremarkable at first glance, but she could feel the dark energy radiating from it. The power it held over her brother. This was the source of the spell, and it needed to be destroyed. Amanda stood up, clutching the pot in her hands, but just as she was about to smash it against the floor, the door to the room creaked open. "Amanda!" A voice called softly from the doorway. Amanda spun around, her heart sinking as she saw Sarah standing there. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Sarah's expression quickly shifted from confusion to realization, and her eyes darkened with rage. "What are you doing?" Sarah hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Amanda's grip tightened on the pot, and for a moment, the two women stood frozen, locked in a tense standoff. Amanda knew that if she didn't act fast, Sarah would stop her, and everything would be lost. "I'm ending this," Amanda said firmly, raising the pot above her head. But before she could bring it down, Sarah lunged at her, knocking the pot out of her hands. It hit the floor with a dull thud, rolling across the room, but miraculously not breaking. Sarah scrambled after it, her face twisted in desperation. "You don't know what you're doing," Sarah cried, her voice frantic. "You will ruin everything." Amanda didn't hesitate. She dove towards the pot, her fingers grasping it just as Sarah reached for it too. A struggle ensued, both women fighting for control of the object that held Daniel's fate. They wrestled on the floor, the tension in the room thick with fear and anger. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room. In their struggle, the pot had been smashed against the bedpost, shattering into pieces. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Both women froze, staring at the broken remains of the pot scattered across the floor. Sarah let out a loud scream, clutching her head as if in pain. No, 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 no! She wailed, collapsing onto the floor. Her body trembled violently and she coiled up in a fetal position, her voice hoarse with anguish. Amanda, panting from the struggles, stood up slowly, her heart racing. She had done it. The spell was broken. Downstairs, Daniel sat on the couch, still staring out the window, but as the sound of the crash reached his ears, something strange happened. His mind, which had been clouded and confused for weeks, suddenly cleared. It was as if a fog had lifted, and everything that had seemed distant and hazy came rushing back with startling clarity. He blinked, his head swimming as memories of Emily flooded his mind. Memories that had felt distant and disconnected for so long. Emily, his girlfriend, the woman he loved. How had he let her slip away? Daniel stood up, his heart racing as the realization hit him. Something had been terribly wrong, and he hadn't even known it. He felt a surge of guilt and confusion, wondering how he had been so blind. At that moment, Amanda came rushing down the stairs, her face flushed with relief. Daniel, she said breathlessly, it's over. The spell, Sarah's spell, it's broken. Daniel stared at his sister, the weight of her words sinking in. What are you talking about? Amanda quickly explained everything, the clay pot, the spell Sarah had used to manipulate him, and how she and Emily had worked together to uncover the truth. As she spoke, Daniel's mind reeled. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but at the same time, everything suddenly made sense. The strange disconnect he had felt, the way he had pushed Emily away for no reason. It had all been Sarah's doing. She's been controlling me? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amanda nodded. But it's over now. The pot is destroyed, and you are free. Daniel felt a wave of new joy wash over him as he thought about everything that had happened. The time he had spent with Sarah, the way he had treated Emily. He had been a puppet, and Sarah had been pulling the strings. I have to see Emily, Daniel said, his voice filled with urgency. I need to make things right. Meanwhile, across the town, Emily sat with Grace at the cafe, waiting anxiously for news from Amanda. She hadn't been able to sit still all day, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. What if the plan hadn't worked? What if Sarah had found out? Just as she was about to call Amanda, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Amanda. It's done. The pot is destroyed. He's free. Emily stared at the message, her heart leaping in her chest. It had worked. The spell was broken. Tears of relief welled up in her eyes as she looked at Grace, who smiled at her with encouragement. Go to him, Grace said softly. It's time. Emily stood in front of Daniel's mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The message from Amanda confirmed that the spell had been broken, but there was still so much to process. Could Daniel really have been under Sarah's control this entire time? Would he even remember what had happened between them? Or was the damage too great to repair? With a deep breath, Emily gathered her courage and entered the house. The first thing she noticed was the air silence that filled the space. It was almost as if the very walls were holding their breath. As she stepped into the living room, she saw Daniel sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, while Sarah knelt on the floor nearby, sobbing uncontrollably. Her once proud and confident demeanor had crumbled into pure despair. Amanda stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her face a mask of anger and disgust. The broken shards of the clay pot were still scattered across the floor, a reminder of the evil that had ensnared them all. Daniel looked up as Emily entered, his eyes red and filled with remorse. He stood up slowly, his movement hesitant, as if he were afraid she might turn and walk away from him again. Emily, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Before she could respond, Sarah's wail grew louder. She clutched her head, shaking uncontrollably, her face wet with tears. I didn't mean for this to happen, she cried, her voice cracking with guilt and shame. I didn't want to hurt anyone, I swear. It was never supposed to be like this. Emily turned her gaze to Sarah, a mixture of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside her. You used dark magic to take him away from me? Sarah, how can you say you didn't want to hurt anyone? Sarah shook her head frantically, her hands trembling as she reached out as if begging for forgiveness. It wasn't my idea. It was Ola, my friend. She's the one who told me to do it. She said if I didn't act fast, someone else would take Daniel and I would be left alone with nothing. I didn't know what to do. I thought I thought I was in love with him and I didn't think I had any other choice. Her words came out in a rush, desperate and broken. I went to the witch doctor because of Ola. She said it was the only way. She said Daniel would never notice me on his own, as I had to use the spell to make him love me. I thought it was harmless, just to get him to see me. But then everything spiraled out of control. I never thought it would go this far. Emily listened, her heart heavy with the weight of Sarah's confession. Once she understood the feeling of wanting love and attention, Sarah had confessed a line that could never be uncrossed. Magic or not, she had manipulated Daniel, and in doing so, had torn apart their lives. Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but filled with sorrow. I was blind, Emily. I didn't know what was happening to me. Everything I did, it's like I wasn't myself. I know I hurt you, and I will never forgive myself for that. But please know that I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't feel it because of the spell. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and relief. She had spent weeks trying to understand how Daniel could have turned away from her so easily, and now that she knew the truth, it was still hard to accept. Daniel took another step closer, his voice trembling. Emily, I am so sorry. If I could take it all back, I would. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Please, don't give up on us. Emily looked at him, her heart aching. She had loved Daniel for so long, and the pain of losing him had nearly destroyed her. But now, standing here, seeing the guilt and regret in his eyes, she knew that the man she had fallen in love with was still there, buried beneath the spell, but still there. The spell might have clouded his mind, but his heart had never truly belonged to Sarah. I don't know, Emily whispered, her voice wavering. You hurt me so much, Daniel. I don't know if I can just forget all of that. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his expression raw and unvulnerable. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to make things right. Before Emily could respond, Amanda, who had been standing silently throughout the confrontation, stepped forward with a steely resolve in her eyes. This has gone on long enough. Without a word, Amanda stormed past Emily, heading straight for the stairs. Sarah, still weeping on the floor, barely noticed as Amanda disappeared upstairs. When Amanda returned a few moments later, she was carrying a pile of clothes and belongings. Everything Sarah had left in the house. She walked with purpose, her anger shimmering just beneath the surface. This ends today, Amanda said, her voice cold and unforgiving. You've manipulated my brother long enough, and now you are going to leave this house and never come back. Sarah's sobs grew louder as Amanda approached her, dropping her belongings in front of her with a finality that sent a clear message. When you give birth, Amanda continued, her tone sharp, we will do a DNA test. If the child is Daniel's, we will make sure he's taken good care of. But you are done. You don't deserve to be anywhere near my brother. Sarah crumbled, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Please, I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she cried, her voice barely coherent. But Amanda wasn't swayed. Her eyes were filled with disgust as she stared down at the woman who had nearly destroyed her family. Pack your things and go. If I ever see you near this house or my brother again, you will regret it. Daniel stood by, silent but filled with guilt as he watched the scene unfold. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. Part of him still struggled to understand how he had allowed things to get this far. But Amanda was right. Sarah had to leave. Trembling, Sarah gathered her belongings, her face streaked with tears. She cast one last pleading look at Daniel, but he couldn't meet her eyes. He turned away, his heart heavy with regret. With nothing left to say, Sarah walked out of the house, her footsteps heavy as she crossed the threshold. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Amanda let out a deep breath, her expression softening as she turned to her brother. "You need to make things right with Emily," she said quietly, "but more importantly, you need to take care of yourself." Daniel nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. He looked at Emily, his heart aching with the weight of his mistakes. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you would let me," he said softly. Emily, still reeling from the emotional whirlwind of the past, felt a small flicker of hope ignite in her chest. She didn't know if things would ever be the same, but for the first time in weeks, she could see the man she had loved coming back to her. "I don't know what the future holds," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "but I'm willing to try." Daniel's face lit up with gratitude and relief, and he stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his. "That's all I'm asking for." Amanda, satisfied that her brother was on the path of healing, gave them a small nod before turning to leave. She had done what she needed to do, and now it was up to Daniel and Emily to rebuild what had been broken. As Amanda walked out of the door, Emily and Daniel stood together in the quiet of the house, the weight of the past still heavy on their shoulders, but with a glimmer of hope shining through. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but they both knew that they had a second chance, a chance to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to believe that things might just be okay. Sarah left Daniel's house that day, her belongings hastily packed and her heart heavy with the weight of the defeat. She walked down the familiar streets of Lagos, her mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. Her carefully laid plan had crumbled to dust, and now there was nowhere for her to go. She thought about going to her friend Ola's place, hoping to find refuge and some comfort there. Arriving at Ola's small apartment, Sarah knocked on the door, her body aching from the emotional exhaustion of the past few days. But when the door opened, it wasn't Ola who greeted her. A neighbor stood in the doorway. Her face ached with concern. "Ola isn't here," the woman said softly, recognizing Sarah. "She's gone back to the village. She fell very ill a few days ago, and her family took her back." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the guts. Ola, the one person who had encouraged her to take these dark steps, was now sick and far away. There was no one left to turn to. Sarah felt a pang of regret deep inside, though she tried to push it away. Her entire life had spiraled out of control, and now she was left with nothing. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt truly lost. She had no one to call, no place to stay. The illusion she had built around her, the life she had envisioned with Daniel, was shattered, and now she was alone. Desperate, Sarah pulled out her phone and called her mother, her hands trembling as she dialed the number. A few rings, her mother picked up, her voice tired but loving. "Mama," Sarah said, her voice shaky, "I need you. I need you to come to Lagos." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then her mother spoke softly. "I will come for you, my daughter. I will come and bring you back first thing tomorrow morning." The next day, Sarah's mother arrived in Lagos very late. She found her daughter sitting on the steps outside Ola's apartment, her face pale and drained of emotion. Without a word, her mother embraced her, holding her tightly as Sarah broke down in tears. The weight of everything she had done, the choices she had made, and the consequences she now faced overwhelmed her. Her mother didn't ask any question, nor did she judge. She simply helped Sarah gather what little she had left, and together they made the long journey back to their village of Enugu. Back in the village, Sarah's life took on a strange, aimless rhythm. She wandered through the dusty streets of Enugu, her once bright eyes now clouded with confusion and loss. The people in the village whispered about her as she passed, but she barely noticed. She was trapped in her own world, a prisoner of the choices she had made. 9 months passed in a haze. Sarah's pregnancy progressed, but she seemed disconnected from it, as if the life growing inside her was a reminder of everything she had lost. She rarely spoke to anyone, even her mother, who watched her daughter with a mixture of worry and sorrow. Then, one quiet morning, Sarah gave birth to a son. The baby boy, healthy and strong, was a symbol of the connection she had once shared with Daniel, though now that connection felt distant and broken. Sarah's mother, seeing the helplessness in her daughter, knew that the time had come to reach out to Daniel. She had hoped that perhaps the birth of the child would speak some kind of change in Sarah, but it was clear that her daughter was lost, wandering through life with no sense of direction or purpose. Reluctantly, Sarah's mother picked up the phone and called Daniel. In Lagos, Daniel and Emily had moved on with their lives, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by Sarah's manipulation. They had recently married in a small intimate ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. Though the scars of the past remained, they were healing, and their love for one another had only grown stronger. When Daniel received the call from Sarah's mother, he was shocked. He hadn't heard from Sarah since the day she had been thrown out of his house. And part of him had hoped that chapter of his life was over. But now, there was a child involved, and he knew he couldn't turn his back on the situation. Emily, ever the supportive partner, stood by Daniel's side as they traveled to the village to meet Sarah's mother and the baby. There was a heaviness in the air as they approached the small one-down house where Sarah now lived. The contrast between the humble setting and the grandeur of Daniel's mansion was stark, a reminder of how far Sarah had fallen. Sarah's mother greeted them at the door, holding the baby in her arms. She looked tired but resolute, her face lined with the worry of a mother who had watched her child's life spiral out of control. "This is the child," Sarah's mother said quietly, handing the baby to Daniel. "He's yours." Daniel took the child into his arms, his heart heavy with emotion. The baby looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, unaware of the complicated circumstances of his birth. Emily stood beside Daniel, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. She knew this moment was difficult for him, but she also knew that they couldn't abandon the child. A DNA test was arranged, and when the results came out, it confirmed what Sarah's mother had said. The child was Daniel's. Daniel and Emily sat down with Sarah's mother, discussing what would happen next. Despite the pain Sarah had caused, they couldn't deny the child his father, and they both agreed that they would take responsibility for the baby. The boy would be raised by them, given the love and care he deserved. But as for Sarah, there was little that could be done. She continued to roam around the village aimlessly, lost in her own world. The once ambitious and cunning woman was now a shadow of her former self, her mind fractured by the weight of her mistakes. The villagers whispered about her, shaking their heads in pity as she wandered through the streets, oblivious to the world around her. Her mother did what she could to care for her, but it was clear that Sarah was beyond saving. The spell had been broken, but the damage it had caused to Sarah's soul was irreparable. She was a woman adrift, with no anchor to hold her down. Daniel and Emily left the village with the baby, their hearts heavy but determined to give the child the life he deserved. As they drove away, Daniel glanced back at the small house where Sarah now lived, a sense of finality settling over him. He knew he would never see her again, but a part of him couldn't help but feel sadness for the woman she had become. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. "We will take care of him," she said softly. "We will give him the love he needs." Daniel nodded, his heart filled with gratitude for the woman by his side. Together, they would raise the child, but the dark chapter of Sarah's life was finally over. And as for Sarah, she remained in Enugu, wandering the village like a ghost, her mind lost in a world of regret and broken dreams. The life she had once envisioned for herself was gone, replaced by the hollow existence of a woman who had paid the ultimate price of her ambition. The most important lesson in this story is that using deceit or manipulation to get what you want will always lead to destruction. We must be careful about the people we let into our lives and the decisions we make, as they can have long-lasting consequences. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.